Europeans didn't know about tobacco until they landed in this country and started using tobacco in various forms. The native people usually smoked it in pipes, but the Europeans used it in various ways as snuff, chewing tobacco, pipes, and eventually cigars. And by the 1800s, cigars had become the accepted usage for tobacco. And it was almost exclusively used by men. Very few women smoke cigars, or history doesn't record the ones in many that do. Cigars were made all over the United States in factories. In fact, in the 1840s, there was a small cigar factory in Key West making cigars. The 1920 census is the only census that recorded cigar maker as an occupation. And in the nation, there was over 200,000 cigar makers listed in the 1920 census. But the things were about to change for Key West. A revolution started in Cuba, 1869-70. Manuel Desespe's started a revolution that began the 10-year war, leading to a heavy migration of Cuban immigrants to Key West. They brought with them the skills to make cigars. The best tobacco in the world by most experts is grown in an area in western Cuba. You can grow tobacco almost anywhere in a temperate climate, but the best being they call it clear Havana leaf. It has the best texture, best smell, so forth. So that was what was the best tobacco to make cigars from, and were being made in Cuba. But in the 1870s, they started making them here. One of the reasons, of course, we now had the Cuban population, and along with that, the federal government was operating on a system of tariffs. Tariffs paid the federal budget in those days, and it was designed to bring in money and protect local industries. So they were written so that you could bring in the raw materials and manufacture them in this country through a number of things. But one of the industries that did that was the cigar industry. You could bring in the good Cuban clear leaf tobacco and manufacture a cigar here in Key West cheaper than you could import cigars from Cuba because of the tariffs. So it soon became a leading industry as the three things came together. We had the workers, we had the incentive to make cigars here, and we had the climate. One thing about making cigars, to make a good cigar, you had to have a skilled worker. They were all skilled workers. And you need the climate because the tobacco doesn't work well in cold and less humid climates. So you need the hot, humid climate to make a good cigar, plus that. So Key West soon became the headquarters for the Cuban cigar industry, the clear Cuban cigar industry, and became known, as one book calls it, Key West Cigar City, USA. We had about 2,000 cigar workers here, and almost always through the time of the industry here, around 2,000 and all, they were skilled laborers who were paid well above the minimum wage. And since they were skilled, if they went on strike, they could not be replaced by unskilled laborers like you could in the manufacturing industry or the coal mines or the steel mills, where you could bring in unskilled laborers and replace them because there never was enough skilled laborers. So they had the overhand of the owners and were able to get the better wages, probably 2 or 3 times the average working man's wage. And the wages were based upon the number of cigars you made. You were paid per 1,000 cigars. So Key West became a very prosperous city because we had 2,000 people here working. There was some paid labor, hourly paid labor, mostly women, who were used. The tobacco were brought in from Cuba. It has to be dried, of course, and then it has to be worked before the cigar maker. It has to be, the stems have to be cut out because you have big stems in the tobacco, and so that the tobacco roller, the cigar roller, has a piece of tobacco without heavy stems in it. The ladies were called stripping the tobacco, and it gets changed later. You see them listed in some of the city directories as strippers, which causes some kind of reaction with ancestors, descendants who see their great-grandmother listed in a city directory as strippers. But it was a veritable, viable industry, legitimate industry, I should say. So anyway, Key West soon became the capital of the Cuban cigar industry. There were still cigar, one you might have heard, one politician was noted for saying what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. Well, a 5-cent cigar was not a Cuban or Key West cigar, and we were top of the line. One of the things the industry had was a lot of nice artwork for their sales on their tobacco, and they passed out different things, sales, plates, bowls, cups, and so forth. But the beautiful artwork, as you can see, and a lot of them used the map of Key West in 1884 as a background for their cigars. And if you want to see more of these labels, if you go to our website, keyslibraries.org, and look under the history pull-down menu, you'll find photos on Flickr, where we have our photo collection, and we have a number of these labels on there. So if you want to see some beautiful artwork, as you'll see, was done there to promote the cigars. And this particular one I have shows the drawing of Key West in 1884 in the background, sometime modified. Gatto had one to show his factory as sort of the center of the thing. Now, one thing you'll hear, one of the rumors you'll hear, of course, is that all the cigar industry moved to Tampa. Well, that's a lie that's been promulgated over the years. After the fire of 1886, a couple of them did, particularly Ebor moved to Tampa, and the reason they moved to Tampa was they had free land, but they were promised by the government in Tampa that they would prevent any strikes and keep the labor line in line, which didn't work out that way. In fact, some of them moved back to Key West because one of the ways they were doing that was bringing in Italian cigar workers, and the best that the Italians and the Cubans did not get along well at that time. So anyway, Key West still was Cigar City, USA, and the best cigars were made here. Well, what happened, of course, is other people wanted to sell cigars and use the Key West label because they could get a better price. And so we find fake Key West cigars out, enough so that the Chamber of Commerce formed a committee and tried to sue other places to do it. One of my favorite fake labels is just called Key West, and it's in William Beck and Company. They're listed in Montreal and London, Ontario, Canada. They had a beautiful label made, and they, in the background, you'll see the beautiful mountain range in Stock Island they used. And of course, they liked that 1884 drawing. But obviously, the person who had made this cigar box label had never been to Key West, because he reversed the island. And if you look, you'll see Fort Taylor has been moved to the north part of Key West, vice the south part. So they didn't know, but they wanted to use that Key West label to promote their cigars as a better, a cheaper brand of the Key West cigars. There was strikes here, and as I said, they couldn't ever break the. They never formed unions here. Well, they formed unions a couple of times, but they never held. But the cigar workers in the United States were some of the early union people and union organizers in the country, because they did make enough money that they could afford to go on strike. Most of your mill workers and mine workers didn't have enough money. When they didn't work, they didn't eat, so they were easily replaced and couldn't go on strike. So you'll find strikes and people trying to break strikes and doing that. But there was always a shortage. Almost every year you see an article that they need 300 to 500 more workers in Key West. There was a couple industry papers called Tobacco Leaf Journal, one of them, and they would have a industry report from all the cigar industry around the country. One of the things that had been known in this country by the 1880s, that cigarettes cause lung cancer. In fact, because of that, a lot of states passed laws prohibiting the possession of cigarettes. Florida passed a law in 1905 outlawing cigarettes. But of course, the Constitution guarantees interstate commerce, and what's legal one place can't be illegal another. But that's a lawyer's question. But anyway, the laws were never upheld. So we're booming along, and it's a big industry. 2,000 people still. We're still making cigars. 1917, 18. World War I happens. As part of that, a couple events happened that making cigarettes important in winning the war. Mr. Duke and Mr. Reynolds in North Carolina were movers in this event. And so cigarettes after World War I became socially acceptable. And I always thought there's a couple reasons. One is, of course, the women didn't like their husbands coming in the house with these cigars that sometimes some people consider the odor bad. And that was one of the things that I'm sure some wives were saying, honey, why don't you try these new cigarettes? And of course, the other advantage, of course, women could now smoke. It was acceptable for women to smoke cigarettes. So the North Carolina guys promoted that. And along the same time, after the war, had been an epidemic in this country. The leading cause of death had been tuberculosis, a highly contagious, fatal disease. And so the federal government started passing a number of laws to try to control tuberculosis. When it's, spitting in public, doing stuff like that could spread it because it was contagious, and particularly in the cigar factories where you would have a typical factory like Mr. Gatto's factory over on Symington Street that's now the county office is. He would have probably 300 workers at a time in that building working in close contact, no separation as we have today. And of course, one guy with tuberculosis could easily infect a number of others. So they were promoting this, and one of the things the guys come up with in North Carolina, that they just put a rumor out, which was not based on any facts, that because they were hand-rolled cigars, and they even claimed that each one was licked by the cigar maker, who could make several hundred cigars a day, but of course he couldn't lick several hundred cigars a day, but they didn't do it. They used a paste to seal the cigar at the end. But the rumor was that cigars could give you tuberculosis. And between everything, it was successful. And so the cigar industry went into steep decline. By the beginning of the Depression in 1929, the cigar industry nationwide had disappeared, including Key West. When somebody tells you the cigar industry moved to Tampa, you can say, no, the cigar industry moved to North Carolina, where they were making cigarettes. And one of the outcomes was that the incubation period for lung cancer is 15 to 20 years, according to medical. I'm sure it varies from people to people, but that's a standard they sort of use. And so this country had the first epidemic of lung cancer in the mid-1930s, after people had been smoking cigarettes. So being a reformed cigarette addict, because I grew up in North Carolina, where you were a communist if you didn't smoke cigarettes. But what saved my life is I got off the cigarettes, which I was badly addicted to cigars, and I started smoking cigars. So I credit that pretty much saving my life from lung cancer. So, but anyway, I finally, 30 years or so, the social problem of smoking cigars got to me, and I quit. But it's still, every once in a while at night, I'll have a dream that I'm sitting on my deck, and I have a cold one, and I have a cigar with Cuban tobacco made in Key West by a real pro cigar roller, and just as I go to light it, I wake up every time.